Hello and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben. Today we're rating the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Playbook and applying it directly to your tabletop game. Specifically, we're drawing from the work of Chris Voss, a former FBI lead hostage negotiator who spent decades talking people down from some of the highest stakes situations imaginable, and then wrote a book called Never Split the Difference that essentially broke down his entire methodology for a general audience. And here's why this works as a lens. Hostage negotiation is a pressure-tested system for getting something from someone who has no obligation to give it to you in an emotionally volatile situation, where the power dynamic is not in your favor. That description fits many meaningful NPC interactions in a tabletop RPG. So, let's get into it. Picture this. Your rogue got caught pickpocketing a city guard 3 sessions ago, and the game master has been quietly threading that consequence forward ever since. Now you're standing in front of Captain Harwick, who has your rogue in irons, who has the legal authority to have him executed, and who is clearly not in a good mood. You have no backup, no leverage, and whatever your social stats look like, they're not impressive enough to feel reassuring right now. What do? Some players might roleplay with the game master, making a case for why logically it makes sense for the captain to let your rogue go. Another player might say, I try to persuade him, roll their dice, land a decent result, and look at the game master expectantly. And if you're like some game masters, you either feel quietly steamrolled into compliance, or you say he's not convinced and watch the player visibly deflate. Same problem, 2 different approaches, same potential dead end. The most common approach to a difficult NPC is what I'll call the logical argument play. You build a case, you present reasons, you expect the NPC to evaluate your argument on its merits and update their position accordingly. Reasonable people respond to reasonable arguments, right? The problem is that NPCs, even fictional ones, aren't primarily rational actors. A well-played NPC is a person with emotions, fears, loyalties, and a self-image they're trying to protect. Captain Harwick doesn't make decisions by running a cost-benefit analysis. He makes them the way humans actually make decisions. Emotionally first, with the logical justification constructed after the fact. Behavioral economists call this motivated reasoning, and it sits at the center of work by both Jonathan Haidt and Daniel Kahneman, 2 of the researchers Voss draws on most heavily throughout Never Split the Difference. When you present a logical argument to someone in an emotionally activated state, it doesn't land as persuasion, it lands as pressure. And pressure makes people dig in. The second mode is the pure mechanical play. I roll persuasion. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that skill rolls don't belong in social encounters, because they absolutely do. But when the roll becomes a substitute for actual engagement with the fiction, 2 things can break down. The player stops being present in the scene, and the game master is left making an arbitrary judgment call about whether a number on a die should override the NPC's established characterization. What both of those approaches share is that they're aimed at the NPC. The player is projecting what they want the NPC to do and trying to apply enough force, logical or mechanical, to make it happen. FBI negotiation starts from the opposite end. You begin with what the NPC needs. You make them feel understood, and then you work from that understanding toward the outcome you want. So that's the frame. Now let's get into the actual tactics. Voss spent years as the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator before he wrote Never Split the Difference, and the core insight running through the whole book is this. Negotiation is not a logic problem. It's an emotional management problem. The job of a negotiator, according to Voss, is to make the other person feel safe enough to give you what you need. That's it. Voss describes the entire discipline as emotional intelligence on steroids, and that framing holds across every tactic in the book. Emotion first, logic second, every time. So we're going to pull 6 tactics out of that framework. I've selected these specifically because they translate more cleanly to a tabletop context and because they're all things you can actually do in the middle of a session rather easily. The first tactic is tactical empathy. Tactical empathy is the foundation everything else is built on. Voss is explicit about what it is and isn't. He draws a hard line between tactical empathy and conventional empathy, writing that the goal is understanding the other side, not agreeing with them or even liking them. You're demonstrating that you accurately perceive their perspective and the emotions driving it. That's the whole job. In the real world, Voss used this in situations where the person across from him had done genuinely terrible things. At the table, this might look like doing your homework on the NPC before you open your mouth. Why does Captain Harwick actually care about this situation? What's his angle? What does he stand to lose? If you've been paying attention across the campaign, the Game Master may have been laying that groundwork. Harwick is underpaid. His superior is politically connected and volatile. He's got a family in the lower city who depends on him not losing his job. Most players walk into that scene and immediately start talking about why they need the rogue released. Tactical empathy says don't. Start by demonstrating that you see Harwick's situation clearly. You're in a rough spot here. Someone powerful enough to matter put you in charge of a problem that was never going to have a clean solution. Saying it plainly and meaning it signals to the NPC and to the Game Master running him that you're engaging with the actual fiction rather than trying to bypass it. The difference between flattery and tactical empathy is that one performs understanding, the other demonstrates it. So here's the mechanical connection. This is where an insight or similar type skill might earn its keep. An insight result maybe shouldn't just tell you whether an NPC is lying. Maybe it should give you some emotional data. What is the person afraid of? What do they want? What are they trying to protect? If your Game Master gives you that information and you don't use it in the conversation, you might have wasted a great roleplay opportunity. Tactic 2, labeling. Labeling is tactical empathy made verbal. You name the other person's emotional state out loud, framed as an observation rather than an accusation. Voss suggests leading with, "it seems like," "it sounds like," or "it looks like." The phrasing matters because it presents the label as a perception rather than a declaration, which leaves room for the other party to correct you. You're offering a read and letting them confirm or push back, and either response moves the conversation forward. "You're angry" is a declaration. "It sounds like you're angry" is an invitation. The first one puts someone on the defensive. The second one gives them something to confirm or correct. In either way, you've now engaged with the emotional content of the conversation instead of the positional content. So why does this work psychologically? Because naming a negative emotion reduces its intensity. There's actual neuroscience behind this. Researchers call it affect labeling, and a study by Matthew Lieberman demonstrated that putting feelings into words measurably disrupts amygdala activity, shifting processing away from the brain's threat response center and toward the prefrontal cortex, where rational decision-making lives. Voss draws on this research, and it's the mechanical explanation for why labeling works because it acknowledges the emotional state and actively helps the other person think more clearly. At the table, it seems like you've been handed a situation you didn't ask for and can't win easily will do a lot of work. Hopefully, the Game Master running that NPC has been thinking about Harwick as a person. When you demonstrate that you see him as one too, you've shifted the entire register of the scene. One thing to watch for, don't confuse labeling with sympathy fishing. It seems like you're in a really tough spot, said in a simpering tone, reads as manipulation, and Game Masters will call it. Say it plainly, mean it, or at least play a character who means it. The tactic works better if it's grounded in actual engagement with the NPC's situation. Tactic 3, mirroring. Mirroring means repeating the last 2 or 3 words of what someone just said with a slight upward inflection. Voss calls it the art of insinuating similarity, and FBI negotiators are trained to use it as a default tool precisely because of how reliably it keeps the other party talking. The technique is almost insultingly simple, which is probably why it gets overlooked.
We don't make exceptions for thieves. Don't make exceptions. Not for anyone. Not in this city. Not on my watch.
You haven't said anything. You've reflected his words back at him. But what that does in practice is keep the other person talking, and people reveal themselves when they talk. Harwick just told you something. There's a standard he's trying to uphold, an identity he's performing, and that's information. Now you know the frame you're working inside. The deeper function of mirroring is that it signals genuine attention without telegraphing your agenda. When players spend their turn in a social encounter talking, they're usually revealing their hand, making their case, burning their arguments. When you mirror, you're gathering intelligence. At the table, this is genuinely useful for one specific reason. Your game master has a lot to track. When a player mirrors an NPC, it often prompts the game master to dig deeper into what that NPC thinks and wants, because the game is asking them to continue. Mirroring gathers fictional information and invites the game master to develop the character in real time, which almost always produces something richer than what they'd prepared. Tactic 4, calibrated questions. A calibrated question is an open-ended question, specifically a how or what question, designed to make the other party do your problem solving for you. Voss is explicit about one important constraint. Why questions are largely off the table because they sound accusatory in almost any context. How and what questions open up collaborative problem solving. Why questions trigger defensiveness before the conversation has a chance to go anywhere useful. The classic example from the book, instead of "I can't do that," you say, "How am I supposed to do that?" You're inviting the other person to solve a problem on your behalf, which transfers the psychological burden while keeping the conversation open. At the table, this has a very specific application. It hands the game master agency over the outcome, which game masters almost always respond to positively. What would it take for you to look the other way tonight? Functions as an invitation for the NPC to name their own terms rather than a persuasion attempt. You're handing Harwick the pen and asking him to design the solution. Whatever he says next, you have a negotiation. Compare that to, "We can pay you 50 gold to let him go." That's an offer. Harwick can say yes or no. The calibrated question generates a conversation. The why warning is worth emphasizing here because it's counterintuitive. Players instinctively ask why questions. Why does it matter if he took a few coins? Why can't you just let this go? In any tense social context, why sounds like a challenge. It sounds like you're questioning the other person's judgment or motives. Swap every why question in your social encounters for a what or how question and watch how differently the scene moves. Tactic 5, the accusation audit. The accusation audit is the most counterintuitive thing in the entire playbook. It means proactively naming every negative thing the other person might be thinking about you before they say it. Every potential objection, every reason they have to distrust you or turn you down, put on the table by you first. Voss frames this as getting ahead of the negative, and the logic is straightforward. Proactively naming negatives diffuses them by stripping away their power as weapons. Once you've said it, it is more difficult to use it against you. 3 weeks ago, we broke into the Magister's Records Hall. Last month, one of our party members accidentally injured a city alderman. And yes, before you say it, we know there's still a warrant out for that. We are aware of how this looks. We are aware that you have absolutely no reason to trust a single word coming out of our mouths right now. Then you make your ask. What just happened? You stole every objection Harwick was preparing to make. He can't use them now because you've already acknowledged them, and paradoxically, the willingness to name your own weaknesses reads as confidence. It signals that you've thought clearly about the situation and you're not trying to hide anything. Players almost never do this because it feels like undermining your own case, but you're actually reinforcing it. Acknowledging that you know how you look is not the same as conceding the argument. It's removing the emotional charge from the counter-arguments before they can become counter-arguments. From the Game Master perspective, when a player does an accusation audit, it usually signals the moment in a scene where the Game Master can let the NPC actually engage rather than just resist. It creates permission for Harwick to be curious instead of just defensive. Tactic 6. That's right versus you're right. The last one is less a tactic than a diagnostic. You're right and that's right sound almost identical, but operate completely differently. Voss identifies this distinction as one of the most important in the entire book. You're right is a deflection, what people say when they want you to stop talking. That's right is recognition, the moment when someone stops defending their position because they feel genuinely understood. One closes the conversation, the other opens it. At the table, you're listening for the tonal equivalent of this in the Game Master's NPC voice. A quality shift that happens when a player has done real work, when they've used tactical empathy and labeling and calibrated questions, and the Game Master's NPC moves from performing resistance to actually engaging with the problem. That shift is your "that's right" moment, and everything after it is just closing. When you get it, don't overpress. That's the other thing Voss is emphatic about. Once you've reached genuine understanding, adding more arguments is counterproductive. The emotional work is done. Now you're just closing. Okay, 6 tactics. Let's see what they actually look like when you run them in sequence. We're going back to Captain Harwick. Same scenario as in the beginning. Your rogue is in irons, you're the one who walked through the door, and you have no leverage worth speaking of. So I'm going to run this scene twice. First, the way it might usually go, then the way it goes when you put our tactics into play. So, you walk in. Harwick is behind his desk, not looking up. You say, "Captain, we need to talk about Aerith. He's a good man in a bad situation, and frankly, the guard he took from has a reputation for leaving his purse unattended in crowded markets. This was an opportunistic mistake, nothing more, and executing someone over a few coins seems like overkill." Harwick looks up. "He stole from a city official." "Right, but it was a minor infraction, and we're willing to pay the fine, and we've actually done a lot of good for the city if you look at our record." "I don't negotiate with thieves or their friends." He'll stand before the magistrate. Scene over. You've hit a wall. You might roll persuasion here and maybe get somewhere, but the conversation is already adversarial. Harwick is entrenched, and whatever number comes up on that die, the Game Master is going to have a hard time justifying a reversal because nothing in the scene has actually shifted. Well, what went wrong? You led with your position. You minimized the infraction before acknowledging it. You made logical arguments to someone who wasn't in a logical frame of mind, and you gave Harwick nothing to do except say yes or no, and he said no. Now, let's run it again. Same room, same Harwick. You walk in. You don't open with the ask. You don't open with Aerith at all. It seems like whoever put Aerith in your cells also handed you a situation with no good outcome attached to it. That's a label. You've named the situation before naming your agenda. Harwick pauses. He wasn't expecting that.
Every thief in the city thinks they've got a special case. A special case?
He keeps going, because that's what mirroring does. Nobody wants to take responsibility. They all want someone else to smooth it over. I'm the one who has to answer to Magistrate Aldrin when the numbers don't look right. You just learned something. This isn't about Aerith. This is about Harwick's exposure to a superior named Aldrin. So file that. It sounds like whatever happens here, you're the one holding the consequences either way. Another label. You're not agreeing with him. You're mapping his reality back at him. He sits back slightly. The temperature in the room has dropped a degree. Now the accusation audit. I know we're not the easiest people to do business with. I know Aerith's record isn't clean. I know you have no particular reason to want to help us. You watch him. He was bracing for an argument. He got an acknowledgement. The posture shifts. Now the calibrated question. What would it look like for this to get resolved in a way that doesn't come back on you? You didn't offer anything. You didn't make a pitch. You handed Harwick the pen and asked him to write the solution. And now he's thinking, which means he's no longer defending. He says Aldrin wants a body in a cell or a fine large enough to be reported upward. If the fine is significant and the record shows it, he's satisfied. That's right. Not you're right. The scene has shifted. The negotiation has shifted from adversarial to collaborative. You and Harwick are solving the same problem now. From here, you close. You agree to a fine that's uncomfortable but payable. Aerith walks. Harwick gets to report a number that keeps Aldrin off his back. Nobody won everything, but the situation moved because you worked with the emotional reality of the scene instead of against it. Why this works at a structural level. There's a shape to that second conversation that's worth naming explicitly, because once you can apply it to any social encounter regardless of system or setting. It moves through 4 phases. Establish safety. The NPC needs to feel like this conversation isn't a trap before they'll engage honestly. Labels and mirrors do this work. They signal genuine attention rather than a player waiting to deploy their next argument. Voss calls this creating psychological safety in the negotiation space, a term that organizational researcher Amy Edmondson explored at length in The Fearless Organization. At the table, the tactical version is simpler. Make the NPC feel heard before you make the ask. Surface the real need. The stated position is almost never the real problem. Harwick's stated position is your rogue broke the law. The real problem is Magistrate Aldrin. Reframe the ask. Once you know what the NPC actually needs, you can reframe your request as something that serves that need rather than conflicts with it. Reframe the ask around Harwick's actual need. The request becomes an offer of a clean outcome he can report upward rather than a plea to release a thief. Same outcome, completely different frame. Close without overpressing. Once the scene shifts, once you've hit that "that's right" moment, stop making arguments. Adding more case building after the emotional turn reads as distrust. It can actually unwind what you've built. When Harwick tells you what he needs from a resolution, that's your cue to agree and exit, not to keep negotiating. Now, a note on dice. None of what happened in that second scene required a roll. That's worth sitting with for a second because I know some of you are probably already forming the objection. The argument usually goes, if players can just talk their way past anything, what's the point of having social mechanics, or even social skills? And it's a fair question. My answer is that the tactics above don't bypass the fiction, they engage it more deeply. And a game master running a well-characterized NPC should absolutely still call for a roll when the situation warrants it. The difference is what the roll is measuring. When a player has done none of this work, a persuasion roll is essentially asking the dice to do the role play for them. When a player has worked the scene, established empathy, surfaced the real need, and made a targeted ask, the same roll is measuring execution. Did the words land the way they intended? Did Harwick believe the sincerity? That's a meaningful roll with stakes and texture. Game designers sometimes frame this as the difference between replacement roles and complication roles, a distinction baked into the Powered by the Apocalypse design philosophy, for example. A replacement role substitutes for engagement. A complication role adds friction to genuine engagement that has already happened. Now let's talk about the game mastering side of this. Everything we've covered so far has been aimed at players, but if you're a game master watching this, I don't want you to feel like you just sat through a tutorial on how your players are going to start manipulating your NPCs more effectively. Because this framework is just as useful, maybe more useful, on your side of the screen. There are 3 ways the FBI negotiation toolkit applies to game masters directly, so let's go through them. 1. Building NPCs who actually negotiate. Most NPCs in published adventures are written as positions. The merchant wants 500 gold. The gate guard doesn't let people through without papers. The crime boss won't betray his employer. Those are starting points, not characterizations. And when players push on them, they tend to either collapse immediately or hold indefinitely, because there's no underlying architecture. An NPC built around Voss's framework has needs underneath their position, and the gap between what they're asking for and what they actually need is where all that interesting social gameplay lives. When you're prepping an NPC who's going to be the center of a social encounter, ask yourself 4 questions. What is their stated position? This is what they'll say if asked. Harwick's stated position is your rogue broke the law. What is their actual need? This is what would genuinely resolve the situation for them. Harwick needs a reportable outcome that keeps Aldrin satisfied. What are they afraid of? Not in a melodramatic sense, just What outcome are they working to avoid? Harwick is afraid of professional exposure. What is their self-image? How do they see themselves, and what behavior would violate that self-concept? Harwick sees himself as a professional doing a difficult job with integrity, compromised by circumstance rather than corrupted by choice. And that distinction matters enormously for how he'll respond to different approaches. Voss frames this in terms of letting the other party save face, preserving their identity narrative even while changing their behavior. The deeper theoretical foundation for this comes from Roger Fisher, William Ury, and Bruce Patton's Getting to Yes, negotiating agreement without giving in. 4 questions, and suddenly the NPC has an interior life that players can discover and work with, rather than a wall they're trying to get over. 2. Using the tactics as performance tools. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The same tactics that make players better negotiators make NPCs feel more intelligent and alive when game masters use them. Think about what it does to a scene when your NPC labels the players. The party has just walked in with an obviously rehearsed pitch. Your NPC pauses, looks at them, and says, "It seems like you've already decided how this conversation is going to go." That's a label. It names something true about the dynamic and immediately communicates that this NPC is perceptive enough to see exactly what's happening in the room. Players sit up when an NPC does that. The scene becomes a real negotiation instead of a performance. Calibrated questions from NPCs are equally effective. An NPC who responds to the party's opening pitch with, "What exactly are you hoping I can do for you?" is doing 2 things simultaneously: gathering information and signaling that they're not going to do the player's work for them. That single question forces the players to actually clarify what they want, which frequently surfaces confusion or disagreement within the party that makes the scene dramatically richer. Mirroring is the subtlest game master tool of the 3. When a player says something genuinely interesting or emotionally loaded and your NPC quietly mirrors the last few words back at them, players will feel that stillness, and what they fill it with might be the most honest, least calculated thing they've said all session. This technique earns its keep specifically in emotionally significant scenes: villain confrontations, mentor deaths, betrayal reveals. And then there's the accusation audit. Picture this. Your big bad evil guy has the party exactly where he wants them. They're expecting a monologue, a threat, a display of power. Instead he says, "I know you think I'm cruel. I know you've watched everything I've done and think you know why. I know that whatever I say in this room, you've already decided it's either a lie or a rationalization. I know you've already written the story of what I am." They can't dismiss him as a cartoon villain because he's already demonstrated that he knows exactly how he looks. Self-awareness in an antagonist is far more unsettling than confidence, and he's used it to force them to actually listen. This is the dramatic function of the accusation audit in villain creation more broadly. It collapses the comfortable distance between the players and the antagonist. Some of the most disturbing villains in literary fiction are consistently the ones who have clearly thought about how they appear to others, who have interrogated their own motives and arrived at a place of terrible clarity. That quality translates directly to the table. 3. Recognizing the tactics changes how you adjudicate. When you know what tactical empathy looks like, what a label sounds like, what a calibrated question is doing, you can recognize them in player behavior in real time, and that recognition could directly inform how you run the NPC's response. A player who opens a social encounter by demonstrating genuine understanding of the NPC situation has earned maybe a different scene than a player who opens with a logical argument or a veiled threat. The NPC should respond differently. The fiction demands it. A well-characterized person responds to being understood. This also means you can use the framework as a silent adjudication rubric. And of course, this can be something that's behind the screen. You don't need to make anyone aware that this is happening, but internally you can track: have they established safety? Have they surfaced the real need? Or are they still pushing against the stated position? Have they made a targeted ask that serves the NPC's interests? Or are they just applying more force? When players hit those beats, let the NPC move. When they skip them, let the NPC hold. The framework rewards genuine engagement with the fiction without requiring you to announce that you're running a framework. This matters most for game masters who feel uncertain about social encounter adjudication, and it addresses the most common complaint about social encounters directly, that outcomes can feel arbitrary, that the game master either always caves or always stonewalls, and neither feels earned. Having principled criteria running invisibly on your side of the screen might change that. The outcomes feel earned because, by this point, they genuinely are. Now let's talk about some pitfalls and limits of this lens. The therapy session trap. The first pitfall is pacing. These tactics work by slowing a conversation down, by creating space, inviting reflection, letting the NPC's interior life surface. That's valuable. It's also possible to overdo it to the point where a single social encounter eats 40 minutes of session time while the rest of the table sits there watching two people talk. Tactical empathy and labeling are tools for significant NPC interactions. The corrupt captain, the reluctant informant, the mentor who's hiding something. They're not the right instrument for every interaction. The tavern keeper who just needs to tell you the road north is dangerous doesn't need an accusation audit. Read the room and read your table. If the players are checking out, you might have gone too deep into the negotiation framework for what the scene actually warrants. The performance problem. The second pitfall is when the tactics become a performance rather than genuine engagement. Players who have watched this video and are now running through a mental checklist, label, mirror, calibrated question, accusation audit, are going to produce something that feels hollow, because it is hollow. Game masters can feel the difference between a player, or their character, who is genuinely curious about what an NPC needs and a player who is executing a script. Voss is actually explicit about this. The tactics only work when they're grounded in real attention. He notes that the most dangerous negotiating mistake is to treat the other side as an obstacle rather than as a human being. The tactics are the vehicle. Genuine curiosity is the fuel. Mechanical application without genuine curiosity produces the uncanny valley version of these techniques, close enough to the real thing to be recognizable, far enough away to feel manipulative. The goal is to internalize the underlying principle, which is that people make decisions based on emotion and need, until the tactics become a natural expression of that understanding, rather than a procedure layered on top of it. The gotcha game master problem. The third pitfall lives on the game master side, and it's the mirror image of the performance problem. A game master who has watched this video and decided to use it as a hidden rubric for grading player behavior is going to produce a different kind of hollow scene. If your internal framework becomes the players didn't hit the right beats, so the NPC won't budge, you've turned a tool for richer fiction into a gatekeeping mechanism. The tactics are a lens for recognizing genuine engagement, not a checklist players have to pass before an NPC is allowed to be reasonable. A player who has never heard of Chris Voss but who is genuinely curious about the NPC, who listens, who asks real questions, who engages with the fiction on its own terms, is doing everything these tactics are pointing toward. Credit it, whether or not it matches the formal framework. The fiction still has to hold. The fourth pitfall is the one that trips up experienced players most often. The tactics can produce a "that's right" moment with an NPC who simply cannot give you what you want, and no amount of skillful negotiation changes that. If the city guard captain is personally loyal to the magistrate who wants your rogue executed, if his family's safety depends on that loyalty, tactical empathy will help you understand that clearly. Labeling will help him feel understood. But the outcome might still be no, because the fiction demands it. Skillful negotiation creates the conditions for a yes. It doesn't manufacture one where the story won't allow it. When that happens, the scene still has done its job. You've learned something true about the NPC and the world. That information has weight and should carry forward. A no from a well-played NPC who genuinely couldn't say yes is dramatically richer than a yes extracted by mechanical pressure, and your table will feel the difference even if they can't articulate why. The real limit. Underneath all four of these pitfalls is the same basic truth. These tactics are only as good as the fiction they're applied to. They work because they're built on an accurate model of how people function, and NPCs are only worth negotiating with if the game master has built them as people rather than positions. A well-characterized NPC with genuine needs and fears and a self-image worth protecting is the prerequisite for any of this to matter. The tactics get you to the door. The fiction has to be worth walking through. So I want to give you something concrete to take to your next session, a repeatable sequence. 6 steps that you can run through any significant social encounter regardless of system setting or NPC. Step 1. Do your homework before you open your mouth. The single most common mistake in social encounters is leading with your agenda before you understand theirs. Before your character says a word, spend a moment thinking about what you actually know about this NPC. What do they want? What are they afraid of losing? What does their position require them to care about publicly, even if it doesn't match what they care about privately? If you have an insight result or equivalent, use it here. If you've been paying attention across the session, use that. The goal is to walk into the conversation with at least a working theory of what this person actually needs, separate from what they're going to say they need. If you genuinely have no information, your first move is to get some, which is what steps 2 and 3 are for. Step 2. Open with a label, not an ask. Your opening line sets the register for the entire conversation. Lead with a label, a calm, plainly delivered observation about the NPC's situation or emotional state. It seems like whoever put you in charge of this didn't give you much room to work with. You are demonstrating that you see the situation from their side before you've made a single demand. This is the move that lowers the temperature in the room. Do it before anything else. Step 3. Mirror to gather intelligence. Once the NPC responds, resist the urge to immediately counter or build on what they said. Mirror instead. Repeat their last 2 or 3 words back with a slight upward inflection and let the silence sit. They will fill it. What they fill it with is almost always more useful than whatever argument you were about to make. You're looking for the real need underneath the stated position, the name of the superior they're worried about, the outcome they're trying to avoid, the thing they'd actually accept if it were on the table. Don't move to step 4 until you have a theory about what that real need is. Step 4. Run the accusation audit. Before you make your ask, name every reason the NPC has to say no. Put it all on the table yourself, plainly and without apology. I know our track record in this city isn't clean. I know you have no reason to trust us. I know this is an inconvenient ask at an inconvenient time. Then stop. Let it land. You've just stripped the venom out of many objections that they were preparing to raise. The conversation is now about what actually is possible rather than about why you shouldn't be trusted. Step 5. Make the ask with a calibrated question. Ask a how or what question that hands the NPC the pen and invites them to design the solution. What would it take for this to get resolved in a way that works for you? You're giving them agency over the resolution, which makes whatever they propose feel like their decision rather than a concession. Step 6. Close without overpressing. When the NPC proposes terms or when you feel the scene shift from resistance to problem solving, stop building your case. Agree to what's workable, be clear about what isn't, and exit negotiation cleanly. Adding more arguments after the emotional turn has happened reads as distrust. It can unwind everything you've built. When Harwick tells you what he needs from a resolution, that's your signal to respond to that specific thing and move toward the close, not to keep selling. The scene is over when both parties have what they need to move forward. So get out before you talk yourself back into a corner. So here's the sequence at a glance. 1. Know what they need before you speak. 2. Open with a label. 3. Mirror to surface the real problem. 4. Audit the accusations before they can use them. 5. Ask a calibrated question and let them design the solution. 6. Close when the scene shifts and don't push past it. That's the whole framework. 6 moves. Adaptable to any table or social encounter. All right, let's bring this home. We started with a rogue in irons and a captain who had every reason to let him be executed. We ended up in behavioral economics, game design theory, and the neuroscience of emotional regulation. But I don't want you to leave here with a reading list. I want you to leave here with one thing you're going to do at your next session. So here's the challenge, or here's the homework. Pick one tactic from this video, just one. tactical empathy, labeling, mirroring, calibrated questions, the accusation audit, listening for that's right. Pick whichever one felt most immediately usable and deploy it deliberately in the next social encounter you're in. Don't announce it, don't explain to the table what you're doing, just use it and pay attention to what happens to the scene. If you got something out of this video, hit that like button, share it with someone who you think might find it interesting, subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment if you have thoughts or a story about a time you used one of these tactics without knowing it. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.